Hello, and thank you for choosing to view this training webinar on an introduction to special education. There's a lot to know about the process by which children are identified as having a disability and in need of special education and related services. This webinar will give you an understanding of the philosophy and history of special education, as well as 10 basic steps involved in the special education process. My name is Sharon Blackman, and I am the Director of Training at Families Helping Families of Greater New Orleans. Our center, located in Jefferson Parish, is one of 10 nonprofit family resource centers in the Families Helping Families network of centers all across Louisiana. We are here to provide support to parents of children, youth, and adults with disabilities or special health care needs. And we do this through individual assistance, information sharing, outreach, and trainings like this one. Our center provides over 100 training opportunities every year on special education and disability-related topics. We invite you to check out our calendar of events at fhfofgno.org regularly and register for any upcoming live training webinar that might be of interest to you. Now let's jump in and learn about special education services. When a child is having trouble in school, it's important to find out why. The child could have a disability, and by law, schools must provide special help to eligible children with disabilities. This help is called special education and related services. Now, remember, not all disabilities are obvious. Most students receiving special education and related services have what is referred to as an invisible disability, one that's not obvious, that can look like your child is just unmotivated or lazy. Rarely are children unmotivated to learn, and if your child is struggling with academics, it's time to find out why. This is what we'll be going over today. First, we'll talk about some frequently used acronyms in special education. Then I'll give you a brief background on the philosophy and laws, and then we'll discuss how a child is identified as needing special education and related services. We'll then move on to how a child is evaluated, the eligibility process, and the individualized education program, or the IEP. And finally, we'll go through the services, progress reports, and the reevaluation requirements. So let's get started. Throughout this presentation, you will hear acronyms. I do try to define those as I use them, but in case they slip by, I want to give you a heads up on some of the acronyms that you will hear and their definitions. IDEA is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which is the federal special education law, and you will hear this one a lot. IEP refers to the individualized education program that your child may have in school. And this is also where transition services are located when they're getting ready to transition from high school to adulthood. FAPE free means free appropriate public education. And that's the cornerstone of IDEA. SBLC is the School Building Level Committee, and that's a regular education committee that's charged with deciding if a student needs to be referred to pupil appraisal for an evaluation. RTI stands for Response to Intervention, and that's a three-tiered program that's used either before or during the evaluation of a student. ODR is the officially designated representative of the school district, which is the person with the authority to commit the district's resources for the student's education. And then IEE is the independent educational evaluation that we'll talk about in a little bit. The general philosophy of special education is that everyone has the ability to learn, regardless of their particular disability or the severity of that disability. Special education is a service. It was never intended to be a place or a placement. We've seen a trend in public education from isolating students receiving special ed services in separate classrooms or in the back of the school to including them in the regular classroom for at least part of the day. And some school districts have done away with self-contained classes altogether. As school systems are being held to higher accountability for all students, public schools have been forced To ensure that students with disabilities have access to high quality education, which generally occurs in a regular ed classroom with typical non-disabled peers. Now, that doesn't mean that special education teachers are not highly qualified and can't provide an excellent education. It just means that special education teachers should be supporting students in accessing the general education curriculum and also supporting those general ed teachers by co-teaching and providing educational support that the teachers may not know, like how to make accommodations and modifications to meet the unique needs of all the students in their class. A little bit of the history, and we won't get bogged down in this, but in 1954, the U.S. Supreme Court issued a landmark civil rights decision in Brown versus the Board of Education. And in this court case, Brown, school children from 4 states argued that segregated public schools were inherently unequal and deprived them of equal protection under the law. The Supreme Court found that African American children had the right to equal education opportunities and that segregated schools have no place in the field of public education. So right now, you're probably asking, well, what does that have to do with the history of special education? Well, replace African American students with disabilities. After that court decision, parents of children with disabilities recognized that their children should have the same civil rights as other typical children. So after that decision in Brown versus the Board of Education, parents of children with disabilities began to bring lawsuits against their school districts for excluding and segregating their kids with disabilities. The parents argued that by excluding their kids, schools were discriminating against the children because of their disabilities. Now, in 1972, so a while later, Congress launched an investigation into the status of children with disabilities and realized that millions of children were not receiving an appropriate education. Congress was so moved by the results that they issued a statement which included this paragraph. They said, the long-range implications of these statistics are that public agencies and taxpayers will spend billions of dollars over the lifetimes of these individuals to maintain such persons as dependents in a minimally acceptable lifestyle. With proper education services, many would be able to become productive citizens, contributing to society instead of being forced to remain burdens. Others, through such services, would increase their independence, thus reducing their dependence on society. So a year later, in 1975, Congress enacted Public Law 94142, also known as the Education for All Handicapped Children Act of 1975. Congress intended that all children with disabilities would have a right to education and to establish a process by which local and state educational agencies may be held accountable for providing educational services for all handicapped children. Initially, the law focused on ensuring that children with disabilities had access to an education and due process of law. Congress included an elaborate system of legal checks and balances called procedural safeguards that are designed to protect the rights of the children and their parents. And you'll hear more about procedural safeguards. Eventually, Public Law 94142 would be renamed the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. In 2004, Congress reauthorized IDEA and added an increased focus on accountability and improved outcomes by emphasizing reading, early intervention, and research-based instruction by requiring that special education teachers be highly qualified. Now, even though special education services were being provided to all students at this point, Congress had enough statistics and reports to show that students with disabilities, even the most severe disabilities, were able to learn when provided an appropriate education by a highly qualified teacher. This marked a significant change in the way children with disabilities were being educated. For the first time since we had special education law, Students with disabilities were now being counted in accountability reports. Students were now expected to have access to general education, as they were now also going to be tested for progress alongside their non-disabled peers. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act of 2004 has two primary purposes. The first purpose is to provide an education that meets a child's unique needs and prepares the child for further education, employment, and independent living. The second purpose is to protect the rights of both children with disabilities and their parents. Now, IDEA is broken down into four parts, A, B, C, and D. They keep it simple. The parts most parents are interested in are parts B and C. Part B is specific to children from 3 to 21, or K through 12, pre-K through 12, basically. And Part C is specific to babies from birth to their third birthday, which is early intervention, or in Louisiana, early steps. And this webinar is specific to Part B services. Our Family Sup and Family Center does provide webinars, though, on Part C as well. So now we're going to look at the 10 basic steps of special education. Step one is that the child is identified as possibly needing special education and related services. If your child received Part C services, which is referred to as early steps in Louisiana, your child should automatically be referred to the local school system for an evaluation. But if your child never received Part C services, there are two primary ways in which children are identified as possibly needing special education and related service. The first way is each state is required by the federal law, IDEA, to identify, locate, and evaluate all children with disabilities in the state who need special education and related services. And to do so, states conduct what are known as child find activities. And typically what happens here is school systems will send flyers home asking parents if they suspect their child of having learning problems. The schools may also advertise and place announcements on social media or websites. The district must be able to demonstrate that they actively searched for children in need of services. And this is not restricted to just public schools. They also have an obligation to search for all children in their district that might be in need of services, regardless of whether they attend school or even if they don't attend school yet. Now, the second way that a child can be identified is that parents can request that their child be evaluated for special education and related services. Teachers or other school personnel can also make those referrals. So if you suspect that your child has a learning difference or disability, you can request that they be evaluated. Parental consent is needed before the child can be evaluated. Under the federal IDEA regulations and Louisiana Bulletin 1508, which is the Pupil Appraisal Handbook, the evaluation needs to be completed within 60 working days after the parent gives consent. And that means that weekends, holidays, and any emergency days off, like weather days, don't count. So Thanksgiving week, Christmas break, spring break, and any other days off are not considered in those 60 days. And that's why some parents tell us that it feels like it's taken forever for their child's evaluation to be done. Also, that 60 days doesn't start from the time the referral request was made. It starts from the time that you actually signed the consent for evaluation. So let's say you signed the consent on November 1st. After you consider Thanksgiving holidays, the Christmas break, Martin Luther King Day, and assuming there were no other days off, that 60-day timeline wouldn't end until probably the first week of February. If you move that consent back 2 weeks to November 15th, and if you factor in an early Mardi Gras break in February, you might be looking to closer to March 1st before your 60 days are up. But time goes by so quickly. So one tip we give parents is to pull out that paper calendar and actually mark down those 60 working days. Know when that evaluation needs to be finished. And also know that school systems can request evaluation extensions, but I'd be very hesitant to give an extension. If you're asked to provide something to the professionals who were doing the evaluation, do that as quickly as possible so that the process can continue moving and it's not a reason that they would ask for an extension. Another thing to keep in mind is students who are English language learners or ELL students have to be evaluated in their home language. Step 2, the child is evaluated. Evaluation is an essential step in the special education process for a child, and it's intended to answer these questions. First, does the child have a disability that requires the provision of special education and related services? Second, what are the child's specific educational needs? And then third, what special education services and related services are appropriate for addressing those needs? The evaluation results will be used to decide the child's eligibility for special education and related services and to make decisions about an appropriate educational program for the child. Louisiana's Bulletin 1508 provides guidance for the evaluation of children suspected of needing special education. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, requires that a student suspected of being exceptional receive a comprehensive multidisciplinary evaluation conducted by qualified examiners. And qualified examiners would be people like pupil appraisal professionals. Those folks are certified by the State Department of Ed to conduct, pupil appraisals. Professionals from other agencies or even in private practice. And some examples might be educational consultants or diagnosticians, certified school psychologists or social workers, speech language pathologists, physical and occupational therapists, and school nurses, and etc. Participation by parents is crucial in all meetings in which decisions are being made regarding your child. Parents must be informed about the process used to assess their child's response to scientifically research-based interventions. And parents have to know about appropriate strategies for improved achievement and the right to request an evaluation. Parents have to be notified early enough to ensure the opportunity to participate in any of the meetings that are going on. And usually, once a concern is noted and parents or teachers request an evaluation, you should be given an invitation to a school building level committee. In Jefferson Parish, this committee is called ABIT, or Academic Behavior Intervention Team. And this committee's purpose is to determine if interventions need to first be tried, and that's known as response to intervention, or RTI, and then to make recommendations for an evaluation. An important thing to be aware of, though, RTI does not need to stop the evaluation process. Some SBLC committees recommend that RTI is tried for a period of time before an actual referral to pupil appraisal is made for that multidisciplinary evaluation. But federal law is clear that RTI cannot stop the evaluation process unless you agree to that. What the suspected disability is will determine what specific criteria are used to determine eligibility. However, all initial evaluations include several documented components. They include a description of each screening used and a review of the screening results. They include a review of all records, including test scores, disciplinary records, grade history, attendance records, etc. A review of any pertinent reports supplied by the parent or someone from outside the school. They include a review of all the interventions that have already been tried, the student observations in environments where they're experiencing difficulties. They include an interview with the student to obtain their perceptions of their performance. They include an interview with the student's core subject teachers to get information about their concerns and about the student's academic performance, even their behavior and peer interactions. They include a family interview to determine the impact of any developmental, education, social, emotional, cultural, or health factors that are having a bearing on the student's educational performance. They include an interview with the referral source if that's someone other than the parent or teacher. And they include an educational assessment conducted by a diagnostician or some other qualified pupil appraisal staff, which includes descriptions of educational strategies, academic and environmental adjustments that may be needed, any curricular modifications that are necessary to provide accessible instruction materials in order to enable the student to show progress in the general education curriculum. They also include, if behavior is noted as a concern, the evaluation includes a functional behavior assessment, which is conducted or reviewed by a certified school psychologist or some other qualified staff member. And then the evaluation includes a review and analysis of any discrepancies between test results and observations, or a review of any discrepancies among evaluation results. Now, if the parents disagree with the evaluation, they have the right to take their child for an independent educational evaluation, and they can ask the school system to pay for this IEE. Step 3 is that eligibility is decided. A group of educators, therapists, as well as the parents look at the child's evaluation results, and together they decide if the child is a child with a disability as defined by the federal law IDEA. The final written report for initial evaluations is a combination of all the data gathered during the individual evaluation process. The data collected by pupil appraisal must be integrated and written in a language that is clear to the IEP team and others who will use it. The written evaluation of an identified student has to contain these things. The written evaluation has to contain the reason for the referral, any additional concerns about the student, a description of the evaluation procedures, a description of the student's present levels of functioning in relationship to the general education curriculum, a description of the student's strengths and support needs, a description of the educational needs of the student, a description of the impairment or condition that enables the student to be classified as eligible for special education and related services, a description and explanation of any discrepancies noted during the evaluation process. The written evaluation has to include recommendations for determining the content of the student's IEP, and that includes the types of services that would be necessary to meet the educational needs of the student and to enable the student to be involved and to progress in the general education curriculum. For a preschool student, it means their ability to participate in appropriate activities and the recommendations for that. The written evaluation must also include a brief summary of the evaluation findings, names and signatures of the assessment personnel as well. There must also be included in the evaluation proof that each of the following was not a determining factor for the suspected disability. That would be lack of appropriate instruction in reading or math, limited English proficiency, environmental or economic disadvantage, and cultural factors. None of these things should play into a child being diagnosed with a disability. If the parents don't agree with the eligibility decision, they can ask for a hearing to challenge the decision, or they can request an independent education evaluation at no expense to the parent. Step 4, the child is found to be eligible for services. If the child is found to be a child with a disability as defined by IDEA, the federal law, then they are eligible for special education and related services. Special education exceptionalities fall under these categories or diagnoses, and you see them on the screen. They are autism, deaf-blindness, developmental delay, emotional disturbance, deaf and or hard of hearing, intellectual disability, other health impairment, orthopedic impairment, multiple disabilities, speech language impairment, specific learning disability, traumatic brain injury, and visual impairment. Gifted and talented are also exceptionalities, but for our purposes, we're going to go by this list. Now, within 30 calendar days after a child is determined eligible, a team of school professionals and the parents must meet to write that IEP, or the Individualized Education Program, for the child. That's within 30 days after the child is determined to be eligible. Now on to step 5, the IEP meeting is scheduled. So now that your child has been found eligible for special education services, the school system is responsible for making a formal commitment of resources to ensure that your child gets a free, appropriate public education, or FAPE. The school system now has to schedule an IEP meeting, as I said, within 30 calendar days. School staff have to do several things to get this set up. They have to contact all participating members of the IEP team, and that includes a regular ed teacher, a special ed teacher, any related service providers like OTs, PTs, speech therapists, APE teacher, school nurse. The officially designated representative, or the ODR, has to be notified, and that might be the principal or assistant principal or another staff member that is authorized to sign off on the IEP and to commit the district's resources to this child's education. And then, of course, the parent and child have to be notified as members of the IEP team. The other things that school staff have to do, they have to notify the parents early enough to make sure that the parents have an opportunity to attend. And it's usually recommended to give the parents 2 weeks' notice. The school must also schedule the meeting at a time and place that's agreeable and convenient to the parents. Most meetings do occur at the school, but the team can decide to meet at another location if necessary. The time should be convenient for the parent, and the length of time to meet should be enough time to complete the IEP without it feeling rushed. And then the school must also provide the parent with notice of who they've invited to attend. Now, when possible, we encourage both parents to attend the IEP meetings. If one parent can't attend, it's great if the parent that is attending can bring a friend or someone else to listen. The first IEP meetings for some parents can be really emotional, and some parents find it helpful to bring along someone else that can focus on listening and taking notes in the meeting. It's not required, but as a courtesy, we recommend that you inform the school district when you do plan to bring someone with you. Now let's turn our attention to the actual meeting process. Oops, I went one too far. Step 6 is the IEP meeting is held and the IEP is written. Now, the IEP meeting will be held for the purpose of completing the individualized education program. And this meeting should be a vehicle for communication between the parents and the school staff to share formal and informal information about the students' needs, about their educational projections, and the services that will be provided to meet the students' needs. The completed IEP document is a formal record of the IEP team's decisions, and it goes on the student's record as well. The timeline for completion of the document is intended to ensure that there is no undue delay in providing a free, appropriate public education for the student. The IEP form is considered to be official when the parent and the ODR, the officially designated representative, have signed the document. The IEP team should always consider the least restrictive environment as the first placement option for the child. IDEA repeatedly states that students should be educated with their non-disabled peers to the greatest extent possible. Regardless of the severity of the disability, students should never be placed in a self-contained classroom before they were given an opportunity to be educated in a regular classroom with appropriate supports and services. Implementation of the IEP means that the student begins participating in special education and related services as written on the IEP. A school district should begin providing services as stated on that document as soon as possible, but no later than 10 school days after the document is signed. The date of initiation of services should be noted on the IEP. If the parents don't agree with the IEP and placement, they may discuss their concerns with other members of the IEP team and try to work out an agreement. If they still disagree, parents can ask for mediation, or the school may offer mediation. Parents may file a state complaint with the LDOE or a due process complaint, which is the first step in requesting a due process hearing, at which time mediation must be available. Remember, parents are equal members of the IEP team. Parents know their children better than anyone else, and it's important for parents to understand the special education and IEP process to ensure that their rights are not violated. Families Helping Families offers a lot of trainings every month on these kinds of topics, so be sure to look us up on our website. Now we're going to go over what happens once the IEP is completed. Step 7, after the IEP is written, services are provided. The school needs to now make sure that the child's IEP is carried out as it was written. Parents are given a copy of the IEP, and each of the child's teachers and service providers should also be given access to the IEP and should know their specific responsibilities for carrying it out. And this includes the accommodations, modifications, and supports that must be provided to the child in keeping with the written program. The IEP itself goes into effect immediately, and the school district should make every effort to get related services in place as soon as possible. Parents can certainly ask during the meeting when the services will be starting. And we also get questions at Families Helping Families about regular ed teachers not having access to the IEP and being told that the IEP is confidential and that they're not allowed to see that. That is bunk. That is not the way it's supposed to be. So if you have had that issue, please call us or just talk directly to the school and tell them that all of your child's teachers and providers need to have a copy of that IEP, because otherwise they can't provide the services that are on it if they don't know what the services are. And teachers need to know about accommodations and modifications if they're going to teach that child the way the IEP lines it out. And it's important that parents monitor the IEP activities. You need to pay attention to classwork and how it's lining up with your child's IEP goals. If you can, ask your child about their accommodations and modifications and any supports that they should be receiving, and make sure that they are receiving them. Step 8, progress is measured and reported to parents. IDEA requires periodic reporting of each child's progress, which gives parents, other members of the IEP team, and the school the opportunity to review the IEP and to make adjustments if warranted. When a child does not make the progress expected, then it's essential to determine why and to take corrective action. Progress reports must be sent to the parents describing the progress toward the achievement of the academic and functional goals. And this report generally goes to the parents at the same time that report cards are disseminated. Step 9, the IEP is reviewed. The IEP team has to reconvene at a minimum of once a year, and more often if necessary. The purpose of the meeting is to review the annual goals for progress and adjust the goals and make any other changes necessary on that IEP. The entire team should be a part of the review IEP meeting. And also, if you feel that the IEP is not meeting your child's needs, you can reconvene the IEP at any time and as many times as you need to during the school year to get those desired results. If you find that your child is not making the appropriate progress that should be expected with the IEP team goals, don't let the first decision that's made be to put them into more special education time. The accommodations and modifications and supports that the student is receiving should first be looked at and changed before changing the child's placement to a more restrictive environment. Keep that in mind, and if you have trouble with that, please call us or your local Families Helping Family Center. And then step 10, the child is reevaluated. Students get reevaluated every 3 years unless the parent and school agree that a reevaluation isn't necessary. So a reevaluation can also be done when the school determines that the educational or related service needs warrant a reevaluation, like if there is improved academic achievement and functional performance of the student, then the school may decide to do a reevaluation. A reevaluation is done when the student's teacher or parent requests one, or when a significant change in placement is proposed, which means moving the student to a more restrictive environment where they'll be spending less time in the general education classroom. And then when a student is suspected of no longer having an exceptionality or disability, and this happens a lot of times to students who have the single exceptionality of speech language impairment. A lot of times kids will have speech when they're young, and then they'll outgrow the issues that they were having as as they develop and grow. So for that reason, they might do a reevaluation and discover that the child no longer meets the requirements for the exceptionality. Now let's go over some important takeaways, a little bit of a review. An initial evaluation cannot be done without the parent's consent. Once you provide that consent, the school district has 60 working days to complete the evaluation. And remember, holidays, weekends, and other school closure days do not count. You have the right to disagree with the evaluation and to request an independent educational evaluation at no cost to you. Once the evaluation is completed, the IEP team must convene within 30 calendar days to complete the written IEP. Parents are equal members of the IEP team. Nobody knows your child better than you. Once the IEP document is completed, services must begin within 10 working days. And finally, do not sign any IEP that you do not agree with. Now, there has been a lot of information in this training webinar. If you're brand new to this process, you may feel overwhelmed, and it's important for you to know that most parents feel exactly how you feel at this moment. But typically, we become more confident as we learn more about this process. It might be helpful for you to take some of our other webinars that break down one aspect of the educational system. You can check out our training calendar on our website for opportunities to learn more about things like the IEP, related services, tests and assessments, accommodations and modifications, and other such topics. And of course, you can always call on your local Family Help and Family Center anytime to find support from a peer, because I, for example, and most of my coworkers have a child with a disability who has gone through this process. So talk with one of us. That's the case at every Family Help and Family Center around the state. We are staffed by self-advocates who are adults with disabilities and parents or other close family members like siblings of people with disabilities. So we're here to provide support to you anytime you just need to talk or you need to get help with your child's educational issues. This page on the slide deck gives you all the ways that we can be contacted. Our email is there, our Facebook. All of these will be live links. If you want the PowerPoint, you can email us at info@fhfofgno.org. I'll be happy to send that to you. And then when you download it, all of these links will be live so that you can contact us and have all this at your fingertips. Thanks so much for joining us for today's presentation. I hope that you've enjoyed this recording and that you'll check out our website and our YouTube channel for other similarly recorded webinars. Thank you.